Monitoring is something that you should always do every day, every moment of the day, because it is going to gather some data which later can help you identify the issues that you might have. And of course, as you can imagine, monitoring can be a little bit tricky sometimes. There are a few reasons for that, especially when you work, of course, with production applications, which is really what you want to monitor. It can be really hard to get the exceptions, to get the logs, basically to get data about your running application, because this application is going to be on a server. When you're running this application in the public cloud, it's going to be on a server which is pretty far away from you, right? So you want to have a cloud provider who is instrumenting the infrastructure and giving you this data so that you can later analyze it and study it. Also, the configuration is going to be different. It's not your own machine anymore. It's not everything on the debug machine and then we try it out. You have a different configuration. Maybe you have multiple servers with a load balancer between them. Maybe you're also going to have some dedicated server, for example, SQL Server for the data and ASP.NET on IIS, for example, for the web application. The scale is going to be different. You're going to be serving thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands, millions of customers. And of course, that can cause some big issues. The data is different. This is also production data, not debug data. So maybe suddenly you have a different format that you didn't really account for when you were doing the development. Getting the tools can be tricky as well. Which tools work well? Well, a lot of that is based on experience, but if you're in Azure, we have that experience, we have gathered that experience, and we are going to be able to make some recommendations to you. One thing which is also important to remember is that your application is not running isolated on a server. There are all kinds of things around it, okay? You have some infrastructure. Maybe some of this infrastructure is on your premise and some is in the cloud, in the case of a hybrid application, which of course happens very often. You have the application itself, and this is your code, so you can instrument it. But even that sometimes can be tricky because pushing a new version of the application, if you don't have a continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline set up, can be tricky. And finally, the network, you know what we say, right? If something goes wrong, it's usually DNS, right? And networking can be very, very complicated to set up, and it is important to monitor it. You will also have protections like firewalls and network security groups and all kinds of things which you need to monitor to understand really what's happening in your application. So, sorry about that. So in this session, we are going to see a few components and a few tools which are going to help you to monitor, and we are going to start with Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is really the all-encompassing solution of monitoring in Azure. This is what we use to monitor literally every piece of infrastructure that we have, and we'll discover how you can use it, and then we'll dive into application insights. Like the name shows, it's a little bit more focused on your application. All right, it's a part of Azure Monitor. It is something that you can add via an SDK to your application. We have SDKs for JavaScript, Java, of course .NET, etc. But it is also built into Azure, and so even without instrumenting your code, you can already turn on application insights. And if you remember, in the second session of this learning path, when we migrated the web application, the very first thing we did was turning on application insights for the application. Even though it is an old version of ASP.NET 3.5, we were able to do that. And we'll talk more about that in this session. We are also going to check the logs, and we gather tons and tons of data, and sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to make sense of the data, and this is where log analytics can help you. So we will see how you can write some queries. You can even share those queries with your team members. You can create tables or graphs in different formats, and really that's going to help you to filter what's going on, to identify exactly what's going on in your application. Then we'll use a feature of Visual Studio Enterprise, which allows us to debug an application in production, a .NET application. Note that Snapshot Debugging is integrated into Azure, and so you can already access it in Azure and gather really a lot of data. But if in addition you have Visual Studio Enterprise, you can download the debug snapshot, and then you can open it and debug in Visual Studio. We'll see a demo about that. And finally, sometimes you want some rich notifications. You definitely want at least an email or an SMS or even a push notification to your phone when something happens. If your site goes down, for example, you don't want to wait until Monday morning to find out that your site was not running during the weekend, okay? So this is something you can very easily do with monitoring and alerts. And then we'll also see how you can use a logic application, for example, Logic Apps. It's a serverless solution on Azure to create a complex notification system. In our case, we are going to use Teams, but it could be also something else, for example, a ticketing system, etc., etc. So without further ado, let's dive into Azure Monitor and Application Insight. Azure Monitor is a unified monitoring system. It's going to collect metrics and logs, and then it's going to save them into a big common store, a unified store. And so that makes things much easier for you later to analyze, because you know that what you're looking for, the information you're looking for, is going to be in that store. Later, you can run some data-driven insights on it, meaning that you have diagnostics tools. We are going to see some of them, analytics tools. You can even run some machine learning algorithms. For example, if you want to detect anomalies in your data, let's say that, I don't know, every day you have 5 errors into your server, because you know errors happen, and maybe it's just a error 500, right, a server error, and then suddenly one day you have 50 of those. That's unusual, okay? You want to be notified when this happens. So these kind of things can be done. And you also have some integration, of course, into DevOps. For example, if you want to get notified or you want to run a different pipeline if something happens. All kinds of issue management tools, for example, security information and event management tools, SIEM, or ITSM, IT security management tools. So basically, first-party tools, we have our own tools, but you can also integrate that into third-party tools if you want. This is, like I mentioned, a unified monitoring system. All right, we collect information from different sources. We'll talk more about that in the next slide. And we then can analyze this data using different tools. For example, we already mentioned application insights. We'll see more about that in a moment. But we also have some container monitoring if you are running Kubernetes or even Docker. And here, this is the data. You may have seen that already in the second session of this learning path. This is where you specify what is being collected. And as you see here, this is a .NET application. So we are collecting some things by default already. For example, profiler information, debug snapshots. We'll talk about that in a moment. SQL commands even. If you are using Java, JavaScript, then you have an SDK that you can add, even Python. And like this, you can configure your application this way. Now we are really inside the application insights data. As you can see, we have more graphs. We see that we have a bunch of failed requests that we are going to have to investigate. Not quite sure what happened here. And here we have the different graphs. So now let's check some of the components of application. The application was getting its data from a virtual machine. Now you see that if we go to the last 30 minutes, all the requests have gone to the new database, which is our database running on Azure. So now we can see a little bit more information. You see that this node is red. Okay, red is not very good. It's probably some failures. And indeed, we see that we have some failures. So let's go and investigate that. We are going to dive a little bit deeper. Those are the failures that we see. We have quite a lot around 9:50 p.m. here. Here in that particular case, doesn't quite make sense, I would say, but you can also change the graph, the graph format. And then also one thing which is really cool is that when you have a query, you can actually share it with your team. So you can copy a link to the query, and then you can send it to somebody else. So here I'm going to simulate that by opening a new web browser. I paste here the link that I got. I am authenticated, and if the user that you are sending that to, or the customer, or the team member that you are sending that to has the same permissions, you can see the query directly in his web browser. So that's really cool because it allows you to share information. We, of course, can teach you queries, all right? So we have some example queries. We also have a full-blown documentation. Here you see that the time duration is set in the query directly. I'm going to remove it. Now notice that you can change the request in the UI directly. So here we have the response time over the past 24 hours, all right? And now I can change that to the last hour if I want to concentrate on something special. Okay, we can run the query. And here again, you could change the chart format if you want. If you want to put the time range or really any other information into the query directly, you can do that. You see that you have some IntelliSense helping you to type, all right? So it is good, also a good way to learn about the format. And so here I'm putting the timestamp to 12 hours ago, so I'm seeing everything which is younger than 12 hours. All right, let's go back into Application Insights to the top. Now we have the live metrics that I wanted to show you. This is a dashboard that you can put, for example, on a big screen into your project room. And now I'm going to hit the server a few times. So let's go and enter a couple of queries. All right, I'm going to refresh that. Like this, we have three different queries, three different requests, and now you can see those three requests here in the dashboard. So basically in real time you see exactly what went on. And of course now I have an average of 1 request per second over the past 5 seconds. You see that it is handled by one server, so that's good. When we did the auto-scaling demo in the second session of this learning path, we saw that it was scaling out to 2 servers. So that's really cool. We can see really in real time what's happening. We also have a very important component, the application performance monitor. And here you see that we have most of our requests, I would say, around 290 milliseconds. So after that, it's up to you to decide. And we know that it's an ASP.NET 3.5 application. It's not the fastest servers that we have, right? We have ASP.NET Core, which is way faster. We see that we have some requests which were much faster than what we had. So using after that the application map, for example, you can identify which components are causing the delay. And you see that here we have the post, which is quite slow, right? It's 2.12 seconds. But at the same time, we only have 3 requests. And so maybe it's not totally representative. So over the course of the life cycle of your application, the lifetime of your application, you're going to be able to refine that. And then you can totally go and see what's going on with my application and can I actually optimize the performance. All right, so this is something that is cool because we were able to see the overall health of our application, but we also saw that we have a problem and we are going to try to debug that. And in a .NET Core application, for example, you can use something called Snapshot Debugging, which is really cool. Snapshot debugging is a feature that is in Azure, so you can have that automatically turned on for your .NET applications. And then after that, it's going to allow you to debug in production. And I know that it sounds really scary because you don't want to connect to your production server in debug mode and start debugging, but it's really not what it is. It is going to collect information. Actually, it's collecting a dump of your application when there is an exception. And then you can download that, you can analyze that, you can check even the code. It supports also distributed applications. So if you have multiple servers, you have maybe load balancers, you have different clients, etc., it's going to allow you to identify exactly what went wrong. And of course, because of the wealth of information that you have in a snapshot like that, you're even able to decompile the code and to see the source code. You need to secure the access, and this is why we have role-based access control for that. So basically what it's going to do, if you have a complex application with multiple servers, you have your load balancer, multiple clients, it's going to allow you to really pinpoint the one server which is causing the issue. It's going to allow you to pinpoint the clients who are associated to this server, which client is having the issue at the moment. And then it's really going to bring things together, just like you have on your debug machine, on your development machine. You very often have just like one server and one client. Maybe even the server is running on the client because it's debug. And of course, that makes debugging very much easier. And this is what the debug snapshot is going to offer you. So let's see a demo. Now for this demo, I'm going to go into another application. This is the e-commerce front store of Tailwind Traders, which is running ASP.NET Core. And this is why I have more here instrumentation possibilities with .NET Core. So this is the application, and I heard that people cannot go to the shopping cart, that they have errors, which is of course terrible because the shopping cart is really a key component of your shopping experience. I think we all agree. And now we see that if I log in and I go to my shopping cart, indeed I have some issues. So this is really bad, really bad. And of course I need to investigate that as fast as possible and see what's going on. So let's go back into the portal. We are going to see how we are configured. We see that in Application Insight, indeed, we have a bunch of failed requests here. This is really not good at all. Let's go into the application map. Now, this application is slightly more complex. You see that you have the client, the web application, and then we have a NoSQL store. It's a Cosmos DB instance with Mongo API, and this is where things seem to be failing. So if we dive into that, we see that indeed we have something which seems to be related to the MongoDB. All right, so this is already a good clue, I would say, to check out what's going on. Let's dive into the views. And here you see there is a small icon. It was quite fast, but we are going to see this icon again. It indicates that we have a debug snapshot. So here, if we see the end-to-end transaction, we see that the issue seems to be happening in the shopping cart. This is the icon that I mentioned. If I click on it, it allows me to open the debug snapshot. It is protected by role, so I need to authenticate myself in order to see the information. And now you can see all the information that you get. It's really a lot. You have the call stack, you have the variables, everything that you would see in Visual Studio when you debug a .NET application. We see the value, all right? And we saw something about authentication failed. Let's see the decompiled code. Now in that case, it doesn't really help me much because it's a MongoDB driver. But at least it helps me to know exactly where I was when the exception happened. Now, one thing which is cool is that you can download the snapshot. So I'm going to save it here to my desktop. And then if you use Visual Studio Enterprise, then you can go and check it out. So this is the source code. I just forked it from the GitHub repo. Notice that it is running .NET Core, so it gives me a little bit more instrumentation possibilities. And indeed, I did add here Microsoft.applicationinsights.asp.NET Core. It's a package. As soon as you add the package, you can have your snapshots. You don't need to change the code. Just showing you that I'm using indeed Visual Studio Enterprise here. And now it means that I can go and open the diag session file, which is this snapshot that we just downloaded. All right, let's load it. It's going to take a moment to load because there is really a lot of information. And so what is this file? It's really a dump of your application and all the dependencies at the moment of the exception. And here you can see that we have collected really a lot of information. All right, let's go down here to see the different modules. All right, you see that you have a lot of things. I think this particular diag session file was around 100 megabytes. And now you can actually use Visual Studio to debug, all right? You can debug your native code, your managed code, or a mixed session if you want. It's going to load symbols because, of course, this is production, all right? We don't have symbols in the dump. We don't have those in the server. I'm going to stop it because I just want to show you the debug experience without loading all the symbols. You can even download source code if this source code is available on GitHub and on a repo that you have access to. And now we see the exception. We can see the details of the exception. And basically, it's going to help us to understand what went on. We see that the authentication failed. That's interesting. So it seems to be really related to the connection string of the MongoDB, which is actually a Cosmos DB database. Notice that you can, of course, decompile the source code. We saw that in the Azure portal already. So let's go and investigate. All right, we see that the Mongo connection string is saved in Key Vault. And it's interesting, this identifier seems new to me. So the good thing is that in Azure, we log everything. And so you can totally see who changed the identifier. All right. Indeed, we see there is a current version. There is a new version, if you wish, of the connection string. It was created not long ago. Let's go and check here the secret value. And here we see immediately that there is a typo. This 2 shouldn't be there. It's absolutely wrong. The server doesn't have a 2. This is actually the old version, the one that was working fine. Let's go and show it. We see that we don't have the 2 here. So basically somebody changed the connection string for some reason and messed it up. So I'm going to go back and fix the problem because that's the first priority. But then later, at any time, I can go back into my key vault. I can see who accessed that particular key vault at what time, who messed up the connection string, so that not necessarily to blame them or shame them. That's not the point, but really just to make sure that it never happens again. All right, so there is some teaching to do here. All right, let's go and change the configuration. As soon as the configuration is changed, now we revert it to the old connection string and probably it should work fine. Let's go back to the website. I'm going to load the shopping cart and now, okay, we see 0 items, which is correct. The shopping cart works now. So basically we have fixed the problem without having to redeploy anything or whatever, but it was really helping us to see what was going on into our application and to fix it. All right, so that's really cool, but we also want to be notified when something happens. Now, I don't know for you, but I know that for me, the worst experience that can happen is when a website that I'm managing goes down and I don't know about it. And then suddenly, maybe I have a very, very complex notification system, which is Twitter. Somebody's going to reach out to me on Twitter and say, hey, dude, your site is down. What's going on with that? And this is really a horrible experience because you're supposed to know what's going on with your site, okay? And this is where notifications can really help you. And the cool thing is that we have that built into Azure. So you can act on errors, all right? Because logs are fantastic. After the fact, you will go back into your logs and you will find out what happened. But you also need to know that something happened. And again, like I mentioned in the intro, right? You don't want to know on Monday morning that you didn't sell anything during the weekend because the site was down. This is really the worst thing that can happen. So you want email, you want SMS. You even want push notifications. We have an application that I'm going to show you later called the Azure app. It runs on iOS and Android. It's really a very, very nice application. You can do all kinds of things. And I will be totally honest with you, when I started using the app, I was thinking, oh, it's a little bit of a gadget, you know, because what can I do? I can, okay, cool, I can go and check my, you know, my Azure resources. But when I learned that I can do push notifications to that app, then suddenly something lit up in my head because I was like, okay, it means that I can really get some detailed information about my application, even when I'm, you know, outside of the house and I'm doing things. And we all know you don't really want to have notifications on your phone, work notifications on your phone when you're out of the house. But, you know, sometimes it's really good to have them if something happens. And then you can also build complex actions, for example, with logic apps, with serverless functions, etc. So one thing that we are going to use here is a monitoring, the availability monitoring capacities that we have in Application Insight is going to help you to check your web servers. And then it's going to allow you to set alerts and say, all right, if it goes down for example, 2 minutes, then I want to be notified with severity 4. It's also going to allow you to send notifications. We'll see that in the demo in a second, as well as build complex actions. So here, this is a logic app, all right? You see that it is basically a series of building blocks, if you want, which are connected together. We have tons and tons of connectors. We'll see that in the demo. And it allows you, without any programming experience, I would say, to be able to say, all right, this is what I want to happen. This is a workflow that I want to happen when I have an alert in my application. So let's talk about notifications and complex action in a demo. So this is back to our rewards application. And here what we really would like to do is be notified when the site goes down for any reason, when we have some 404 or any type of error like that, really. So let's go to the portal. I'm going to go here into Application Insights again. Let's go into the data, and we are going to use here the availability dashboard. All right, so this is where we see the availability. We see that we had already some tests. Everything was successful, 100% availability. So this is really good. The specific test here, I'm going to name that, okay, this is my rewards availability test. Good. This is a ping test, and we can enter the URLs that you want to ping. You can either ping the main URL, or you can ping a sub-URL. Now you can also parse dependent requests, meaning that if an image or a CSS file, for example, is not found, then you can also get notified. Now we are configuring 5 test locations. You can configure more or less if you want. And you see the test frequency is every 5 minutes, which means that we are going to ping every 1 minute from one of those 5 locations. So we have a 5-minute cycle. It says that if the status code is not equal to 200, then we want to be notified. And this is our availability test that we create. All right, we see that right now everything's working fine. Let's go and open the rules and configure an alert. All right, so here we see that at the moment we have this condition, which means that we will get notified if 2 sites or more fail. And then we are going to create what we call an action group. The action group is going to help you to basically set a set of alerts, and then you can use this action group for different alerts depending what you want to do. So here, first of all, I'm setting here the details for the alert rule, severity 4. All right. Going to go back here, create a new action group. And here I'm going to say what this action group is going to do, what notifications it's going to send. So like everything else, it is created inside the resource group. I'm going to give it a name. All right, we have an actual name, and then we have a display name. And the next step is to set up which notifications I want to send. So we are going to start with something simple. We are going to say notify the owner of this Azure resource. All right, so let's go and take a role. We want to take the owner roles. Those are just predefined roles that we have. And then I'm going to say, all right, when this happens, I want the role to be notified because we know the email address of the owner. Okay. Next notification, I want to be notified as well. And I'm going to use an email first. So I'm going to enter here my email, my work email. All right. But you know, emails, I don't know for you, but I don't really have notifications for email on my phone because I get really a lot of emails. There is a risk that it's lost. And this is why I also want to set an Azure push notification. Notice that you could also send an SMS or even a voice message if you want for accessibility. I'm going to say, all right, this is the account that I am logged into my Azure app with. All right, I'm using here the Azure app on Android. You can use it on iOS as well. I'm going to give a name to this group of notifications here. All right, and now I will say, in addition to that, I will complex workflow. So let's go into actions. And here I want to select a logic app that I already created, but I could also select other things, for example, a runbook, Azure function, any kind of webhook really is going to work. And here's the logic app. I already created it. It's a simple logic app with an HTTP trigger, and it is called rewards availability. So as you can see, it has been through the resource group. So let's select OK. And we are going to give a name to this rule. And then we will go into the logic app and we will say what the logic app actually does. All right, at this point, I can review and create this action group. All right, it is ready. And for the logic app, what we want to do is have the whole team to be notified if something happens. And the team shows we have actually a tool for that. We have Microsoft Teams, all right? And this is one of the many connectors that you can use into a logic app. So we are going to do that. First of all, we enable here the rule like this. It is, all right? But the logic app is not ready yet. So let's go back to our logic app here. And as you can see, I'm starting with an HTTP request, all right? This is a trigger for the logic app if you wish. Here we see the URL. But it's okay because it has been found. And then we need some payload. We need the information about what happened. Now, in order to get the payload, I found this documentation page. All right, so make sure to write down here. You will get the slides, of course, and everything at the end. Let's go and select what happens when the request is received. And here I'm going to say I have 2 possible scenarios. First of all, the status went back to normal. All right, so here I see that the whole information has been parsed by the logic app. It's a JSON payload. I go and say the status, that's the information that I want to get. And if the status is equal to deactivated, it means that the alert went back to normal. All right, so in that case, if it is true, I'm going to add an action. And for this action, I'm going to choose Microsoft Teams. Again, it's one of the many, many connectors that we have. Into Teams, I'm going to say I want to send a message to a specific channel in a specific team. So let's go and select the ID of the teams that I want to use. All right, these are all the teams that I have access to with my tenant. And by the way, I had to log into Teams in the demo. You didn't see that because it was not super important, but I had to do that. Then inside this team, we have different channels. So I'm going to select the channels that I want to use. This is something that has to do with this application. And then I can enter a complex message. For example, here I'm going to set this to bold. I'm going to say, all right, this is back to normal. And what is back to normal? Well, again, from the JSON information that was by Logic App, I can get the resource name. For example, like this, we know which resource went back to normal. Let's save that. And now we are going to specify what we do when the status is not deactivated, meaning that the alert fired. So again, we want to send a Teams message, but we can also do a lot of things. We have hundreds and hundreds of connectors, as you can see, a lot of those. Some of them are first-party Microsoft connectors, but we also have some third-party connectors. We even support things like SAP or Gmail, for example, as you can see here, so the whole Google suite, all right? Now, in my case, I want to use Microsoft Teams, so let's go back here. I'm going to select the post a message feature of Teams. All right, let's find it. It is a little bit higher. Here we go. And then I will select again the team ID. All right, in that case, it's going to be the same team and the same channel. And this time I want to enter a little bit more information than before because this is an alert. So I'm going to say there is a problem with a specific resource. All right, so there is an issue, and then I'm selecting the resource that has the issue. Let's put that in bold. I could even put it in red in order to make sure that people see it, all right? The resource name again. And then later, I'm going to add also the context of the error, which is a big JSON block. And if I did that really in production, I would probably parse the JSON block again. You can do that in the Logic app very easily. But in that case, for the sake of time, I'm just going to copy the whole context information. And you will see it's not very, very easy to read that. It's just a big JSON block, basically, but it's already going to give me a lot of information about what went on in my alert. Okay, so now my Logic app is ready. I'm going to enable it. And like this, really, everything is hot, all right? The alert, the action group is hot. At the moment, nothing happened. That's cool. But let's simulate a failure. And in order to do that, I will go to my web application. And I am very, very simply going to just turn it off. So it is really a full-on simulation of something went wrong. All right, let's stop the web application. And now, after a short moment, all right, it takes a couple of minutes for the alert to fire because, again, we are monitoring. We don't want to fire every time that some small things happen. But after a short wait, if we go into Microsoft Teams, we will see that we have a problem. So here we have the availability dashboard. We see that the availability is down. All right, some tests have failed. That's really bad. We see the location where it failed from. Actually, in that case, all 5 locations that we set up have failed. So we really have a problem. It means that something went really, really bad. All right. We see that in Teams that we received the message. It was posted in my name because I'm logged into Azure, and we see the full context. And even better, in the Azure application running here on Android, but you can also run it on iOS, we see that we have a notification, push notification. I can go and open the app, see what alert we got. Severity 4 is what I set. We see which resource has fired. So we have a problem with Tailwind rewards on Azure. Well, actually, one thing which is cool here is that I can go and check it out directly in my app. And so this is the application. This is a resource in question. And we see immediately that it is stopped. So the first thing that I want to do is restart it, and then we'll see what happens. All right, we'll continue monitoring. After a short wait, it went back to normal in Teams. So it's good that I get this notification. My team can be okay, go back to resume their activities over the weekend. And after a while, of course, I will continue to monitor my application and see if everything went well. All right, so what did we see in this module? We talked about quite a few components. We talked about Azure Monitor, which is really where you monitor everything about your application. And then we dived into a part of Azure Monitor, which is Application Insights, more aimed at the application itself, but you saw that we are also monitoring the whole request and we are correlating that. We have also log analytics, which allows you to make sense of complex logs and really a lot of information here. And then we used a Snapshot Debug in order to debug in production using Visual Studio Enterprise. But even if you don't have Visual Studio Enterprise, it's always good to turn it on because you saw that we collect really a lot of information. Finally, we also acted with notifications on my phone, per email, per SMS, and also complex notifications with logic apps. In our case, we use Microsoft Teams, but you could also send notifications to a ticketing system, for example. So if you want to know more about this session, this is where you can go to get the slides, the links to different resources, and really everything you can think of, aka.ms/mod50. I really hope that this session was interesting for you and that you had fun watching it. This is the end of the learning path. Thank you so much for watching.